Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. We're going to continue in Colossians chapter 4, beginning at verse 2. I'll read a few verses here, and then I've got a couple of specific challenges to lay before you. One or two aspects of which I've mentioned before, but maybe this time, if you haven't been up for the challenge previously, you might like to give it a go this time and see how you get on. Here's how it goes. Colossians chapter 4, beginning at verse 2. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Conduct yourselves wisely towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may now know how you ought to answer each person. Before I get to the challenges, which come from verses 5 and 6, let me just make a couple of comments about verses 2 to 4, because there's some interesting stuff there. You might want to just make a note of it or reflect on it. Verse 2, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. It's an interesting way of thinking about prayer, isn't it? Prayer with watchfulness. I think that probably has reference to the watchfulness for the needs of the world around you. Jesus telling his disciples to watch and pray, and perhaps also to the Old Covenant priestly vocation of watching over the house of God, the temple or the tabernacle. Perhaps there's an allusion there. But in practical terms, praying with watchfulness is to pray with a watchful eye, so to speak, to what's going on around us, the needs of the people around us and the needs of our world. Worth thinking about that probably a little bit. And then in verses 3 and 4, you have another glimpse into the personal situation of Paul the Apostle, where he makes it clear that he's in prison. End of verse 3. He prays that the Lord will open a door for his ministry, and perhaps he's got in mind there, well, both opening the doors of the prison so he can get on with his ministry, and he's done that before, but also something else the Lord has done before, opening a door for his ministry in prison. Think of the beginning of the book of Philippians, where most of the palace guard have come to know something about Paul's gospel because he's been in prison and been able to preach to them. So there's some interesting stuff there just to reflect on as you think about God's providence in unusual circumstances that you wouldn't have chosen. Well, the Lord can open a door for a ministry even there. But to verses 5 and 6 is where I want to turn for the challenges I want to set before you. And both of them have to do with something that I've been thinking about a little recently. It's the subject of social media. And this is something I've alluded to occasionally in the past, and, well, not surprisingly, because it's such a massive feature of our world, the way that we use our time. Many of us spend a lot of time on social media. I actually stopped doing most of that a number of years ago for various reasons, which I'll go into if you want to get in touch and ask me. But it's a large part of our culture, and therefore it warrants a certain amount of comment and evaluation and perhaps, where appropriate, criticism. And here in verses 5 and 6, Paul raises two issues which it seems to me may have the potential to shed some light on some potentially unhelpful aspects of social media. And the first is the use of time. The way that social media dominates our time has been chronicled in various ways over the last decade or two. The way that it's designed specifically to keep you hooked and so on. Well, Paul says, conduct yourselves wisely towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. And it might just be interesting for all of us, whether or not you're a social media addict, to chronicle the use of your time. I think I've recounted before that 20 years ago or so, I was invited to take part in an exercise which involved logging how I used every minute of the day for 2 weeks, and then looking over it with somebody, a mentor at the time, just to evaluate how I was spending my time. It was a really salutary exercise. I thought I was quite efficient in the use of my time. Well, I was wrong. And since then, I've periodically downloaded an app for my phone that will do it in a more slick and organised way, just to see again, just to take a snapshot of what I'm doing with my time. Well, it's always a little bit disturbing to realise how inefficient you are, even when you think you're being efficient in the use of your time. If Paul was worried about people being distracted by slightly frivolous and pointless activities back in the first century, can you imagine what you'd think about the modern world, when we have so many more, mainly technologically driven opportunities for distractedness and pointless use of time? Well, if that's a challenge that appeals to you, give me a shout, or maybe just grab yourself one of those apps on your own and take a look at how you spend your time. And then contemplate what else you might be able to do with that time if you chose more deliberately what to do with it. Then second, verse 6. Another feature of social media that has been widely chronicled is the way in which it has a tendency to distort the way that people speak. You've probably noticed how vitriolic the comment sections of various social media platforms can become very quickly. And it seems somehow inherent in many of those systems that ordinarily kind and gracious and thoughtful people can become spiky and even malicious and unkind in the way that they speak. Well, that's unfortunate, isn't it? Given verse 6, let your speech always be gracious. And so if you are let's say, a heavy social media user, then here's an opportunity for you. You could go through the last, month or so of posts, print them all out, or stick them all in a file somewhere, or just look at them, or ask somebody else to look through them for you or with you, and ask them to tell you whether they think that all those words were, quote, gracious, seasoned with salt. That'd be a challenge, wouldn't it? So those two challenges, perhaps, an attempt to put into a practical framework what Paul is saying here in verses 5 and 6, how we spend our time, how we use our words. And if you're at all concerned that maybe, just maybe, you've got some space for growth and maturity in either of those areas, then wouldn't that be a great opportunity just to take a look at least at what you're doing with your time and what you're doing with your words, to see if here might be an opportunity for growth in maturity and faithfulness and Christ-likeness. Well, I'll leave you with that. I think that'll do for now. The Lord bless you, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.